Good afternoon, members of Parliament, support staff, radio listeners, TV viewers, those viewing via social media, and the members of the media. Welcome to the public meeting number 23 of today, September 5th, 2022, of Monday, September 5th, 2022. I would like to, we have a quorum of 8 members, and for now, I'd like to take a brief adjournment of maybe 10 minutes? Yes, 10 minutes. Meeting adjourned for 10 minutes before we continue. Meeting adjourned. Welcome back, members of parliament. I would like to give a special welcome to the Minister of General Affairs and Prime Minister, Ms. Silvera Jacobs, and her support staff. As stated before, we have a quorum of 12 members. Please let's stand for a moment of silence. There are no notice of absence or notice of lateness received, so I'd like to now turn the floor over to the members of parliament for those that would like to take the floor for notifications. MP Manuel, you have the floor.
Madam Chair Lady, good morning to you. Good afternoon to you, Madam Chair. Let me say good afternoon to the Honorable Prime Minister and her support staff, my colleagues, and the people of St. Martin who is viewing and watching by whichever means. Madam Chair Lady, I've taken notice of the email that was sent to the members of Parliament based on the request that I have been asking for a couple of weeks now concerning the tender. And Madam Chair Lady, it got back to us, and 90% of the advice, Madam Chair, is redacted. I mean, you really can't do nothing with it. You can't see nothing. You can't comprehend anything. And Madam Chair, it was made known that this was done based on advice from JZ&W, and we are still awaiting an email from the Prime Minister. Now, Madam Chair, I would like to see that advice that came from JZ&W that says that the advice that was sent to the governor should be redacted with all of the information needed to be blocked out like this, Madam Chair Lady. Now, you know, it's not all the time I like to do this, Madam Chair, but we have asked for this information, Madam Chair Lady, and the advice that came to the members of Parliament is 17 pages in total. Madam Chair, it makes no sense they send the advice redacted when I have the whole complete advice, which is 30 pages, Madam Chair. All the information from the governor, the lands were slight, everything. I even took the liberty to have it all translated in English, Madam Chair. This is the full advice, Madam Chair Lady, with the same div number, Madam Chair, 8948. It's 30 pages. What we received from the government is 17 pages of redacted information. Madam Chair, everything from the governor, the correspondence and everything is here. Full, clean, clear, public document. What we get from the government is 17 pages with 90% of it redacted. Can we please get that advice from JZ&W that says that they advise them that it should be sent this way? Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Emmanuel. Is there any other member of Parliament that wish to have the floor for notification? I see no need. Then we have as agenda point for this public meeting, National Ordinance amending the temporary National Ordinance COVID-19 cuts employment conditions for civil servants in connection with the phased reduction of the COVID-19 cuts employment conditions for civil servants. This can be found on the parliamentary year 2021-2022, number 161, and also under incoming document number 1123. Parliamentary year 2021-2022, dated July 7, 2022. Parliament received a national ordinance amending the temporary national ordinance COVID-19 cuts employment conditions for civil servants in connection with the phased reduction of the COVID-19 cuts employment conditions for civil servants. Again, it was mentioned that it was found under an incoming document 1123 dated July 7, 2022. Central Committee meeting was held on July 8 on the subject matter, during which the members of Parliament posed their questions and the Minister answered these questions. A report has been made on the deliberation in the Civil in the Central Committee meeting and was sent to the government as well as the members. The government answered this report with a so-called nota naar aanleiding van het verslag under IS 1158-2021-2022 dated August 31st, 2022. The public handling of this draft national ordinance commenced on August 31st, 2022, in which members of parliament posed questions to the Prime Minister in the first round. The meeting was then adjourned, and today the Prime Minister has returned to answer the questions posed by the members of parliament in the first round. I would like to now give the floor over to the Prime Minister to answer the questions posed by the members of parliament. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Lady. Good afternoon to the griffier, members of parliament, people of St. Martin, of course, my support staff and all those supporting the parliament in any form or fashion for this meeting. Madam Chair, taking the notification of the member of parliament into consideration, this I believe took place while we were in meeting here last Friday in the morning. I remember the discussion about it and needing legal advice. As you know, the SG of General Affairs signs off on those advices, confirmed that the advice indeed did mention that confidential information would have to be blacked out to be able to share with Parliament. Of course, there were options to have the document ter inzage only in the office of the griffier, under 4 eyes to be seen, but the minister opted to share the document with YZNW's advice. So I will confirm that it wasn't already included in what was sent, and of course that advice can be forwarded to Parliament. I'd like to take a moment before answering also, Madam Chair, seeing that tomorrow is the 5th anniversary of the passage of Hurricane Irma, and the fact that 5 years later we can assess and see what has and hasn't been done. Truth be known is we face a couple more disasters, maybe not of natural kind, and so we would just like to recognize the pain and suffering of all those who have gone through, especially that hurricane, or those, because Maria followed soon after, those that are still in recovery. As you know, as a country, we're still in recovery when we were hit with the pandemic and the economic crisis as a result of it, the worldwide economic crisis, no less. We are bouncing back still. We are still on the way back. We are far from being fully recovered from both disasters. And I continue to pray for also the mental health of our people who indeed have been going through it. We cannot, of course, nowadays we have a lot more awareness for mental health issues, but I think some of us have become overnight psychologists and psychiatrists as well. So I would urge any and all persons still feeling, whether it is PTSD, we cannot self-diagnose, but if you feel overwhelmed, that you do seek the necessary professional assistance. You seek friends, family, your pastor, counselor, whomever you can turn to understand that, yes, we're going through it today, or we've gone through it, and we continue to go through it, but in gratitude, we can live to see another day to continue to push on. Madam Chair, I wish all strength during this difficult time, and with that, I'd like to go over to the questions that were asked in the first round. The first group of questions, Madam Chair, were from the Member of Parliament, Westcott Williams, and related to whether government had an idea about how the school boards, or whether the school boards complied with the law to cut the benefits. How have those different school boards implemented the cut, and was this publicized? Madam Chair, confirmation was received by the Ministry of ECYS as well as the Secretariat of the Council of Ministers that the school boards have complied with the request to submit the manner in which they would apply the cuts. Government has no authority to determine how it should be done. School boards have asked for ways and means to do that. We've presented that. We've had several follow-up meetings with them. After several meetings, most recently, actually, again, with the Minister of Finance in particular for some clarity, school boards have, one for sure has resubmitted, and others are busy recalculating how it will be applied. Seeing that constant lack of clarity, it has thus far not been published, but it is the intention of government, once we've received all the information, that it will be published. Question 2. According to the State Secretary, the CFT did not advise on this matter of the cuts. What was the CFT recent advice on this matter, or on Budget 22, or on the amendment of Budget 22? No, indeed, the CFT did not specifically advise on this matter, as it was not part of the requirements for the reduction of 12.5%. Regarding the most recent advices from the CFT, it was the intention to do so before I left the office, Madam Chair, but they are currently being forwarded to Parliament. It is the Budget 22 CFT advice, number 30 of 2022, dated April 14th, 2022. There's an advice on the first implementation budget, CFT, of May 31st, 2022. There is the Budget Final Amendment 2022 advice from the CFT dated June 10th, 2022. And there is an advice on the second implementation report from the CFT of August 30th, 2022. These 4 advices are currently being forwarded to the Secretariat of Parliament. Question number 3, the accountability ordinance for deviating from the rule. The Member of Parliament, Westcott Williams, mentions that only Parliament can deviate from the budget. The budget right belongs to Parliament. Is there an exception clause in the accountability ordinance? It doesn't leave it up to government to decide when to deviate. The rationale of government is flawed, according to the Honourable Member of Parliament. There is indeed, Madam Chair, an exception clause in Article 50 of the National Accountability Ordinance, which does provide a legal basis to depart from the budget without prior parliamentary approval. Namely, based on Article 50, paragraph 1, deviations from the budget are possible prior to the adoption of a national ordinance amending the budget. And I quote at sub A, if this is acutely necessary in the national interest, or B, in the event of an unanticipated urgent need during the service year for which no provision is made in the budget. In paragraph 1, acute is deemed to refer to circumstances in which the country must absorb the consequences of war or threat of war, a disaster, or another exceptional occurrence. To the extent that the assessment of whether there is an acute national interest is not assigned to another body in a statutory regulation, Article 50, third section, assigns this right to the Prime Minister. Following the relevant decision, Parliament shall be notified in writing at the earliest opportunity of the financial consequences of this, adding proposals for absorbing these. Unquote. The requirement of notification of Parliament, Madam Chair Lady, was adhered to through the submission of this legislation and Budget Amendment 2022, which is en route to Parliament if it has not yet arrived. Regarding the event of unanticipated urgent needs during the service years, Article 30, fourth section of the National Ordinance, Accountability Ordinance, regulates for the Council of Ministers to agree on this, which is basically a prerequisite for the submission of any laws. So government, having taken into account what is the case, made a decision with a Council of Ministers decision and forwarded it on to Parliament. And also for the record, Madam Chair, I did, in a meeting of Parliament, I believe it was a closed door meeting of Parliament, bring it forward to the members of Parliament and also ask for your input, what did you think, etc. And I could remember at least one member, specifically member asking this question, stating they would need to see the draft in order to take that decision. And so therefore, the draft came for your perusal. So it would be incorrect to mention, Madam Chair, in the government's position that our rationale is flawed. Question 4, government needs to explain with regard to the vacation days. It is stated as part of replacing the vacation allowance, an increase of vacation days is proposed. Increase has to be decrease. I think increase is not correct. The increase from 1.2 to 4.3%, where is this increase taking place? Where is the change? It's not in the law proposed to Parliament. In contrast, Madam Chair Lady, members of Parliament, to the law that regulates the 12.5% cut for semi-government entities, the law for the government regulates not only that the 12.5% cut has to be implemented, it also additionally regulates the manner in which it has to be implemented. The purpose of this amendment is to take out the vacation allowance part as part of that 12.5% cut. However, this does not mean that St. Martin can start phasing out the 12.5%. As previously explained, for this, the 4 conditions of the Kingdom Council of Ministers would have to be met, which were already elucidated on in the previous meeting. Until the phasing out of the 12.5% cut can commence, the part of the vacation allowance has to be replaced by other components. This to keep meeting the 12.5% cuts requirement. As part of the replacement of the vacation allowance, it is proposed to use vacation days. At this moment, we use vacation days to cover 1.2% of the 12.5. Now, to replace the vacation allowance, it is proposed to use vacation days to cover 4.3% of the 12.5%. In that way, there's an increase in the percentage of that is used for vacation days, so that it would result in a decrease in the actual days, if that is understood. So a larger percentage of the days will be used towards the cut, so will be lost. Therefore, it will realize a decrease in days. So the result is an increase in the amount of days to cover the 4.3%. Question 5. Did government not find it prudent to inform Parliament before taking or after taking this decision? As I just explained, one minute, Madam Chair, I have to refresh. Wait. Madam Chair, may I have a moment to deal with my technical challenge? 5 minutes. Thank you.
No problem, PM. The meeting adjourned for 5 minutes. Welcome back, members of parliament. We just took a brief adjournment to allow the Prime Minister some time to MP. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was at question 5 from the Member of Parliament, Westcott Williams, requesting whether it wasn't prudent to inform Parliament. Indeed, we did find it prudent, as I mentioned a while ago, to inform, and that's why during the drafting, prior to the drafting of the law, in a closed-door meeting, I did mention it. And with the submittal of the draft law, Parliament is then informed officially in writing. And the Budget Amendment 2022 will include the specific budget line for the vacation allowance, which is being processed to Parliament as soon as possible. MP Westcott asked question 6. Government has recently approved a policy on agriculture. The policy document outlines the next steps, which includes legislative amendments as a result of the that's a question. Of the policy amendments, can government be a bit more forthcoming regarding the agriculture policy and legislation? The answer was already provided in a note following the final report, namely that the policy was recently approved by the Ministry of TIAT and Minister of TIAT and is on its way to the Council of Ministers for vetting and approval. The policy document outlines the next steps, which includes the necessary legislative amendments. However, this can only be determined after it has been formally approved, and therefore I cannot provide a timeline for such at this time. Note also that the necessary capacity which will be needed has to be sourced for the execution. For more elucidation on the details related to the agriculture policy, Madam Chair Lady, I am sure that the Minister or the Acting Minister of TIAT is readily available to come to Parliament to have that further discussion. As it relates to the question on Mr. Wyatt in St. Peter's, has this issue with the land been addressed? If not, why not? And if yes, how? I received confirmation that the Ministry of Romy is in the final stages of dealing with this, and again, once that is finalized, I'm sure the Minister would be better equipped to provide an answer on the details asked. Question 8 from the Member of Parliament. In answering my question, she mentions on the start of the phased elimination of the cuts, it is answered that one of the conditions is the draft of the top incomes. In addition, the Minister of Finance is working diligently to get favorable advice from CFT to the RMR, so not all the conditions have been met. However, Parliament is being requested to approve this law amendment. Indeed, Madam Chair, the approval of this law before the Parliament for an amendment to the cost-cutting measures on a 12.5% cut is important in its totality, in the full picture. The purpose of this amendment is to take out the vacation allowance as part of the 12.5% cut. However, this does not mean that currently St. Martin would not or can start to phase out the 12.5% cut. As I previously explained, this has 4 conditions attached to it. I believe I came here to Parliament, discussed these. They were originally 8 conditions. They were watered down to 4, but they remain as conditions at the end of the day, which requires the RMR to get an advice from the CFT, etc., etc. That is still in the process, so we, by wijze van spreken, have not been granted the opportunity to actually phase them out. That is why the decision was taken to swap them out with another execution method. Though, for the record, it has been publicly stated that we are not in agreement with this being necessary, seeing the way the Kingdom Council of Ministers continue to function, BZK continues to function with their quid pro quo requirement for everything, and the fact that despite us not needing liquidity up until this quarter, a request for liquidity has in the meantime been submitted, and is being held in the balance by this pending advice. So this is how it works. We know what we're working with, and as a result, we felt it was urgently needed to remove that vacation pay from this 12.5% cut, and this is why this piece of legislation is here right now. It does not start the phasing out, but at least once the other conditions are met, it can be the first step in the phasing out. At this moment, I would like to reiterate that we are still meeting the conditions with the 12.5% cut with the approval of this legislation. Publication of the law, question number 9, of the law for the amendment for semi-government institutions. The Member of Parliament stated this is not being discussed. According to the law, the manner in which entities apply the law has to be published. Was this done by the responsible ministers? It is stated that the relevant minister held correspondence with different government institutions. What does this mean? To further clarify, this law, Madam Chair, as you know, all 2 of them, I should say, have been quite contentious from the onset, and as such, the application has not been smooth. Although the entities have submitted their application of the cuts, with the consistent uncertainty of interpretation and changes in the situation, the publication has been delayed. However, as I mentioned in answering a previous question, it is the goal, once we have received the updated calculations and ensure that all entities have reported, that this will be published as required. Question 10 was on the CCSU. The swap is not included in the draft amendment. Is there an agreement on a swap for vacation days? How will the swap affect the vacation days of the teachers? How will this affect the 12.5%? How does this relate to the application of the 12.5% cuts by the school boards? To respond to that, Madam Chair Lady, the documents depicting the agreement of the unions have been, in the meanwhile, submitted and outline how the application of the swap would contribute to the 12.5%. Can you confirm receiving such? The letters from the unions whereby they agreed and how, yes, thanks. With reference to the manner of the implementation, I believe I responded to that in the answer given under question 4. Where is the note of wijziging to adjust the correct date as referenced by the government? The note of wijziging has been prepared and is awaiting the signature of the Minister of Finance, and after my signature will be presented to Parliament. So hopefully before we go into it must be done before we go into the second round. It is stated that the amount for the vacation payment is included in the budgeted amount for personnel expenses of the budget 2022. This is because the budgeted amount for personnel expenses is 217 million, while the projected current actual expenses are 202. This gap is caused by budgeted but not filled in vacancies. How did the CFT advise to lower the budget 2022? How did they advise to lower the budget 2022 of the country? The CFT did not specify how to lower the budget. They used a starting point that was the realized cost levels of 2019, and that they should indicate the ceiling for 2022. So while they didn't say how to do it, they established a ceiling, which is commensurate with the realized costs of budget 2019, which is the last budget before the pandemic, and a budget in which we still had a budget deficit, by the way. We consider this stifling to the organization being able to realize the projected improvements, including those related to the measures in the reform package. And we will continue to further discussions with the Ministry of BZK and the CFT to have better understanding of this. So to further elaborate on that, budget actuals of 2019, which was contingent on liquidity at the time, is hampering budget setting for 2022, post-pandemic, and 2023 as a result as well. Yet there is expectation that the country and the organization will be able to execute planned projects and programs in keeping with the country package, in keeping with the national development vision, in keeping with all that is necessary for this country, while limiting growth on the personnel as well as the operations. Madam Chair, for us, we find that an untenable situation, and as such will continue to further that discussion as needed. Question 13 from the Member of Parliament, Westcott Williams, was that government need for liquidity support for 2022 is 41 million guilders. How is this amount specified? This amount indicates the projected liquidity shortage. The amount is based on the quarterly calculated difference, again, between the overall realized year-to-date income compared to the expenditures projection. So they've taken a look at quarter by quarter, first and second quarter. The third quarter is still in progress or just started, so it's still in progress. So that would not have been counted as yet, but they've looked at the first 2 quarters and looked at the actual expenditures vis-a-vis the income, projected expenditures and the actual income, revenues collected. And based on that is where the 41 million came from. With the same challenges, Madam Chair, as what I mentioned before in comparing it to 2019. The Member of Parliament lastly asked us to provide responses from the unions, and those responses have been provided in the meantime, Madam Chair. I now move to the questions of MP Christopher Emmanuel. Can the Prime Minister provide a definition of what education personnel means? To answer the Member of Parliament, in the temporary national ordinance on the cost-cutting measures COVID-2019, government personnel, overheidsdienaren, the definition as mentioned under Article 1, sub B is, and I quote, onderwijspersoneel, personeel zoals bedoeld in het bezoldigingslandsbesluit onderwijs. In the bezoldigingslandsbesluit onderwijs, it is mentioned in Article 1 under C, onderwijspersoneel, dubbele punt, onderwijsgevend en overig personeel dat aan een openbaar of bijzondere school is verbonden in de zin van de Landsverordening basisonderwijs, de Landsverordening voortgezet onderwijs, de Landsverordening secundair beroepsonderwijs en educatie of de Landsverordening funderend onderwijs. By that, Madam Chair, for those that may need a translation, onderwijspersoneel, teaching and or personnel attached to the giving of education is considered all those persons working in a public and or subsidized school, as well as those falling under the laws of basic education, secondary education, secondary beroepsonderwijs, what do you call that in English? SBO. The NIPA school falls under that one. So secondary vocational education and base foundation-based education, FBE. So basically, all teaching and school personnel fall under the definition as discussed. Can the Prime Minister provide a definition of government organs? Are subsidized schools considered as government organs? In the beginning of the law, reference is made to education personnel. Does subsidized schools fall under educational personnel? I think I just answered that. The temporary national ordinance on cost cutting under Article 1C mentions Parliament, Council of Advice, General Audit Chamber, the Ombudsman, and the Social Economic Council as staatsorgaan, government organ. Therefore, subsidized schools are not considered in this regard as government organs. What is considered educational personnel, I already described in the previous answer. Question 3 from Member of Parliament Emmanuel. Does this one, the draft law before us, absolve or wipe out the restriction for the subsidized schools, school boards to be able to pay the vacation allowance? I ask the Member of Parliament through you, Madam Chair, to refer to the answer as I gave to question 4 from MP Westcott Williams, indicating that the semi-public sector entities are free to determine the implementation method of the 12.5%. In contrast, government for which the implementation is regulated. So while for government it is regulated, while the law counts for all concerned, the authorized or the competent authorities of school boards determine the implementation of the law, and not the government of St. Martin. Question 4, do the subsidized schools fall under education personnel? Contradiction in one of the 3 laws, the subsidized school fall under, they are not absolved. Can the government provide the subsidized schools with the documentation that absolves them not being to pay the vacation allowance? These school teachers, are they considered educational personnel? Based on the definition of educational personnel, Madam Chair, as was mentioned in a previous answer, school teachers of subsidized schools are also considered as educational personnel in the application of this ordinance. First, based among others on the National Ordinance for Basic Education, the authority, as I mentioned before, is the subsidized school board and not the minister. Secondly, as previously explained, in contrast to the civil servants, the law does not regulate how the 12.5% cut must be implemented. The entities are allowed to follow the regulated implementation of government, but are free to implement it in a different manner as well. So it is not compulsory, the manner in which it is executed, only that it is executed. Question 5, what are considered government organs? I think I answered that already. 6, is it discrimination to pay one kind of teachers and not pay another kind? I would want to believe the MP meant one category, or the subsidized versus the public. Okay, no. As explained before, the subsidized entities are free to determine their implementation. I mean, I could go into a long spiel as to what the law says and what the Constitution says, etc., but when you judge discrimination, it must be on equal standards. And so based on the fact that the the competent authority of the government public schools is the minister, and the competent authority of each school board is their school board, that cannot be considered the equal setting to determine discrimination. As such, I think I've mentioned it before, they're allowed to follow the implementation that government use, but they're not obligated to, and so each entity will have 12.5% cut. That is where the equality exists, and the manner in which it is executed is up to the school boards. I go now, Madam Chair Lady, to the questions of MP Bryson. I believe the first was a statement in which he was responding to the Article 50 interpretation, and I must say that I can confirm the timeline of events in terms of me coming here, discussing this here in Parliament, as well as his understanding of Article 50. This piece of legislation, Madam Chair, in the second question, he asks whether it can be considered a first step to stop the freeze on the wage bill, as IMF reports or recommends. While it was the intention of this government to see this as the first step, based on the steps or the conditions brought forth while we were in that process by the State Secretary and confirmed in the RMR, we could not use it as a first step. However, once we've met the conditions as put forth by the State Secretary and approved by the RMR, we would then be able to use this as a first step. And not to forget, Madam Chair, that we have been advocating for the removal of this since the beginning of the year and have been having serious discussions and even agreement with the State Secretary on it. And that's why it is really for us quite disillusioning that those conditions were placed on it, especially seeing the understanding the State Secretary had for the reality of the experiences of the workers that were negatively impacted by it. The following question or statement was concerning taking measures and starting the hiring. How is that going? The Member of Parliament asked. So, despite the measures taken, the hiring of needed personnel has continued, although it has been a challenge to attract persons with the cost-cutting measures in place. Next to the regular hiring, I can mention that the job mixer, especially for the Ministry of Romy, has yielded quite a number of interviews for which persons have started to work. And as mentioned by the minister, I hired last week. Others are online. I'm hearing from persons who applied that they're getting their interviews. Of course, with the many persons that applied and having limited P&O staff, it still has probably not gone as quickly as would have been anticipated, seeing the process needed to finalize hiring. And of course, the Minister of Finance has also mentioned that for him it was a success, the recruitment part. So of course, we look forward to seeing those hires. All ministries continue to hire as much as budget allows and the time constraints involved. We are, as a Council of Ministers, looking at how we can make the serious challenges we face, though, is, for instance, in the Department of Legal Affairs, and yes, to recruit legal personnel, and we are still trying to find ways to make it more attractive or adjust the process somewhat. Question 4, does the Prime Minister see this as a crucial step to reverse these cuts? In my opening statements, Madam Chair Lady, through you to the Member of Parliament, I clearly outlined that this was a crucial step towards alleviating the financial constraints that the civil servants were experiencing. The reversal of the cuts, as mentioned, is based on complying with the conditions set, which started with the amendments in the National Ordinance on the top incomes by the Minister of Finance. Hopefully that will also be handled post-haste here in the House of Parliament so that we can get the necessary actions there out. And we can hear from the members of Parliament also what they recommend, how they feel about the law as put forth. As you know, this law on top incomes has been also heavily debated throughout the kingdom and has seen quite a lot of negative responses in both Curacao and Aruba, with Aruba tabling amendments and then having challenges to move forward to the next step. So also that, that constraint on Parliament is another aspect that we see as very, very difficult. And seeing the impending visit of the State Secretary to St. Martin to discuss slavery, I am very interested to hear how this will be seen in terms of a continued top-down approach from the Netherlands as a throwback to those days, and how we feel the effects of slavery still affect us here on St. Martin. So I look forward to those discussions as well. The next question, Madam Chair, came from MP Rian Peterson, wherein he clarified from his perspective and our interpretation Article 50, and I would just refer to my answer to MP Sarah Westcott-Williams, question 3, in which the authorities of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers was explained. And I must mention that the main reason that we agreed upon that was urgent for us was the recent inflations in conjunction with the upcoming hurricane season and the need to alleviate the strain on the civil service. Based on the vote, Madam Chair, question, people already were paid. It will be difficult to take back. As I've stated in my opening remarks, it is definitely not our intention to claim any of that vacation pay back. We are looking with your support as Parliament to provide also the civil servants with that legal certainty that that won't be done with the approval of this legislation. By removing it as one of the conditions and finding another space to cover that whilst we await the approval to start phasing out, we would then be working together to give the necessary relief to the people of St. Martin, Madam Chair. With that, I've come to the end of the questions, and I turn the floor back over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your answers in the first round. I would now like to turn the floor over to the members of Parliament for clarification, and I see the first member of Parliament that wishes to have the floor is MP Rolanda Bryson. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Good afternoon to you, the Griffier, my colleague members of Parliament, the Prime Minister, the support team, and those viewing. Madam Chair, I would like to thank the Prime Minister for those answers. And in one of my questions, maybe just a little bit of clarification, because the first question I asked was about the importance of at least how I view this as an important first step in the phasing out of it. And I think she gave a bit of an explanation. I think maybe I can clarify the question a little more, not just, let's say, from a legislative trajectory, but she was kind of going into, well, this first step, then the Eremer and so on. Let me maybe make my clarification question like this. Is this part of the strategy of the government of St. Martin? So this piece of legislation forms part of the strategy to phase out civil servants, cuts, COVID-19, etc. So whether that includes legislation, negotiations, Eremer decisions, country packages, whatever, is this part of that overall strategy? To really understand that this is a long-term goal and vision of the government. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Bryson. Next for clarification is MP Sarah Westcott-Williams. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and a good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to my colleagues, and a good afternoon to all tuned into this meeting. Madam Chair Lady, I want to thank the Prime Minister for her responses to the questions posed by members of Parliament on this draft national ordinance. Madam Chair Lady, I would like, based on those answers, the Prime Minister to be more specific in explaining what the semi-government institutions have submitted in explaining how they have decided to cut personnel benefits with 12.5%. The Prime Minister, Madam Chair Lady, gave answers in two instances at the beginning of my questions, from which I drew the conclusion that we do not have at this time an overview by the semi-government institutions as to how they apply the 12.5%. However, further down in the answers, the Prime Minister mentioned that the applications have been submitted, and then went on to suggest as if it is not clear. Madam Chair Lady, what I want from this question that I have been asking from day one, because I think that this law turns around that very issue. Let me repeat, Madam Chair Lady, so that the Prime Minister can understand and explain her answers with respect to this. So for clarity, I'm going to use school boards. But when I use school boards, I mean all of the institutions falling under the law top incomes of St. Martin. The standardization of top incomes. That law, standardization of top incomes, cuts the salary, benefits, etc. of semi-government institutions with 12.5%. Does or does not the government know whether any or all of these institutions have not paid out vacation allowance as part of their decision to apply the 12.5% cut. So in all the information that the government has received, is that clear? Is it clear? Is it so that there are institutions that also, like the government, did not pay out vacation allowance? Is that clear from what these institutions have submitted, or is that it's in itself not obvious from what the government has in front of it today? So, Madam Chair Lady, if that can be made clear in as simple terms as possible. Madam Chair Lady, in terms of clarification, let me leave it here. I have other questions and I'll deal with those in the second round. But let me understand that part in terms of what did the institutions, school boards, submit to government that they cut or did not cut as the benefits of their workers to comply with the 12.5% law, which is not the law before Parliament at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. Madam Prime Minister, should we take up adjournment for you to respond to the clarifications, or 5 minutes? Okay. We'll adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes. Good afternoon and welcome back, members of Parliament. We just took a brief adjournment to allow the Prime Minister some time to come with the responses to the clarifications posed in round one. I would like to now turn the floor over to the Prime Minister, Sylvia Jacobs, for the clarifications. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe MP Bryson had the first clarification question. If this is an important first step, I think I clarified that. Maybe he was out of the room for a moment when that happened, but I will restate for the record that indeed the intention was for this to be the first step. However, when the whole RMR thing came into play with the conditions, we tried to find a way to still be able to give the relief while maintaining the 12.5% cut. So yes, this is a first and very important first step, and the rest of the proposals, discussions moving forward will be aimed at alleviating as much as possible. Understanding though that once we need liquidity support, it cannot be completely erased. We can go right down to 1%, 0.5%, but at the end of the day, we will only be able to remove it completely, okay, if we can afford to do so. So yes, it is an important first step, which will be realized once the actual discussion is had in terms of how we're covering, and that we expect to happen after the 4 conditions are met. So this is the first step to legalize what has been paid out, but in the long run, the goal is to continue to break down the percentages that have been taken from the civil servants, yeah? And from MP Westcott Williams, wanting more specific an explanation as to whether the semi-government entities have submitted in explaining how they wanted to apply the 12.5% cut. Indeed, that was done. And then she mentions in her earlier questions, oh, sorry, this is me. In my earlier questions, we do not have the overview of how the 12.5% was applied. The applications have been submitted. There was all this unclarity as to what can be and cannot be applied, and many entities sought a sort of an approval by government as to what could be used, what couldn't be used, and some even thought they had to apply it idem dito, as we did. So based on that unclarity and further discussions, new proposals have been made by some entities, and in keeping with that, not all are clear or were clear at the time, and to date, some of the meetings held with specifically school boards was just recent. We've received from all the school boards only one new updated recalculation, so we are awaiting those. I don't think they received a timeline or a deadline for such, but I know at least one meeting, school board meeting, was last week. So as soon as we have the full overview from all the school boards and or other entities as to their final decision in the application, this will be published as required by law, or the overview can be shared with Parliament. So while we are waiting that clarity in how they are going to do it now, then we can be able to share that with you. So in some cases, I can say that some entities did maybe 50% of the vacation pay with other benefits based on the types of benefits they offered their staff. I know some offer, whether it's uniforms, whether it's, I don't know, I can't remember what was mentioned, I don't have it in front of me, but they looked at different ways in which the benefits that they give could be utilized, including days and the like, and they are busy submitting those recalculations as we speak. So once we have those, Madam Chair Lady, through you, we will be able to provide that overview in terms of how it has been proposed. Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister Jacobs, for your clarification. We have now come to the end of round 1, and now we're going to be moving over to round 2. And according to the speakers list, I will give the floor. The first person on the speakers list is MP Westcott Williams. You have the floor.
Madam Chair Lady, thank you once again for the opportunity to address the responses from government in this first round of handling this particular draft ordinance. Madam Chair Lady, I'm not going to belabor the issue with respect to the accountability ordinance and the authority, nearly the sole authority of Parliament to approve the finances and the financial management of government. The exceptions to this rule, as both the government side and the Parliament side have addressed during previous sessions on this topic. Madam Chair Lady, I would need to know now, since we have all become quite familiar with this Article 50 of the National Accountability Ordinance. And as I stated in a previous round of this meeting, the exceptions are clear. So the exceptions under which the government can deviate from prior parliamentary approval to do an expenditure. The first one under this Article 50 being in the case of acute national interest. And then it goes on. The article explains what that is. This is not to the discretion of government to explain or to decide what they understand under acute national interest. Then you have B. You have the second part of the exception that government can, ahead of parliamentary approval, decide on a financial item that is not in the budget. And Madam Chair Lady, here again is the crux. Because when it comes to that, it isn't about the legislation like we have in front of us in this case. It's about the finances of the decision of government. And continuing under that very same article and what is meant under the part about unexpected upcoming need. That's what it states. Unexpected upcoming need in that particular year. And if the government decide, and I would like to know what exactly was the decision of the COM on this unexpected, onverwacht, dringende behoefte that came up. Unexpectedly, the government was confronted with this expenditure and could not do otherwise in the view of the government than to say, well, we're going to run ahead of parliamentary approval and we're going to execute this. Because had that been the case, the government would have had to immediately prepare the financial consequences, not necessarily the law in terms of what they're doing, but the financial consequences, and send that to Parliament. So I would like to see the decision of the COM regarding this onverwachte, dringende opkomende behoefte, or however it is phrased in the law. Because I assume it couldn't be the war part. It couldn't be the war or that, so it couldn't be the first paragraph of Article 50. So it had to be the second. And if it is the second, has the government complied with the conditions of the second paragraph of Article 50 the way stated? Is my question. Madam Chair Lady, so that's the Article 50 back. That's all I want to know. I don't want a legal explanation of Article 50. I want to know what did the government apply of Article 50 and what was the decision under the paragraph B. Madam Chair Lady, the government continues to say that this particular legislation in front of the Parliament, so paying out vacation allowance to civil servants, is not yet is not yet in deference of the conditions. It's not yet in deference of the existing condition of the 12.5% cut. Madam Chair Lady, all of this talk about what we're doing, and I paraphrase the government, what we're doing is taking 6% vacation allowance from the 12.5%. We pay now the vacation allowance, and on the other hand, we are going to decrease vacation days, not increase vacation days. You're increasing the amount that is tied. But no, what the government is stating is we are increasing vacation days, point out, period, out, done. That's what the government is saying, increase vacation days. It's not an increase in vacation days. It's a decrease in vacation days and an increase from 1.2 to 4 point something percent. That's what it is. The government answer says an increase in vacation days. So that's why I made a comment, not to get a short lecture about we going from 1.2% to 4 point something percent. Madam Chair Lady, if the government can explain, because the government is maintaining that this is an urgent matter. Madam Chair Lady, let me state emphatically here that Parliament's approval of this law or not could never lead to the government taking back the vacation allowance that was paid out. And the government should stop making it seem as if that is the case. Because hell would have to freeze over first, according to me, before that happens. So the government should stop making it seem as if, oh yeah, but if Parliament doesn't approve this here, that we get now without the financial part of it in the amended budget 2022, oh yeah, but then, you know, we need to agree to this because otherwise the paid out vacation allowance is in jeopardy. To the opposite. The government need to decide that for those school boards that also did not pay out vacation allowance, that they can pay it out. That's what the government need to decide now. Not make it seem as if Parliament doesn't agree with the handling of this budget, that means that the vacation allowance that was paid out already is going to be retracted. Absolutely not. Madam Chair Lady, and talking about the school boards that did not pay out vacation allowance like the government, now that the government has paid it out, those school boards, can Parliament receive an overview of that? Can Parliament receive an overview of the school boards that, as part of the 12.5% cut, did not pay out vacation allowance in the information that the government got? Madam Chair Lady, so if the government can address that Article 50 and its application specifically, if the government can address this thing that there's no swap in the law before us. The law before us is taking away part of the 12.5% cut without any further explanation. What is the urgency behind it? That it was proposed that this does not even await the 6 weeks term of the Ombudsman, and can the information from the school boards that did not pay out vacation allowance, can that information be provided to Parliament? Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Westcott William. Indeed, I completely forgot to remind the members of Parliament that the second round is 10 minutes, but MP Westcott already, of course, knew that. Next on the speakers list, we have MP George Ponteflat. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to my colleagues in Parliament, our Honorable Minister of General Affairs and Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs and her support staff, or Khifir, those persons who are viewing and those who are listening. Madam Chair, everything has a history. Everything has a history. And Madam Chair, we are here today in this Parliament discussing this particular law, Madam Chair, based on history. Madam Chair, we all know exactly what transpired some 2 years ago, where COVID-19 struck not only the world, but also St. Martin. And it took a heavy toll, as a matter of fact, a devastating toll on the economy of St. Martin, where it became necessary for St. Martin, who could not obtain any kind of loan anywhere else but from the Dutch government. And Madam Chair, why do I say a history? Because sometimes we seem to forget that whenever we come to sudden decisions, it is because of circumstances, and in this case, beyond the control of government. Madam Chair, again, I would like to stand here and say something new, something different. Madam Chair, it is difficult, extremely difficult, Madam Chair, because what I see is not an attempt to ensure that the persons who are suffering, who the government is trying to assist, Madam Chair, within the framework of the law, that yes, your I's should be dotted and your T's crossed. But Madam Chair, because of circumstances, it is not always it is not always possible. Madam Chair, again, reality tells us and reminds us that if better could have been done, this 12.5% would never have been put in place as one of the conditions that has our civil servants, our school foundations, boards, teachers in this situation. So I can stand up here and try to detail and interpret the law and say what it says, what it does not say, Madam Chair, but it does not change the reality that right now the spending power or the purchasing power of our civil servants, our teachers, and many in St. Martin is less today than it was yesterday, and more so because of inflation. So, Madam Chair, I don't want it to come across as if government just sat back and said, yes, we have to do it this way, and use the 12.5%. It was with a gun to our heads. And I want the public to remember that. 6 months, Madam Chair. 6 months, and I repeat, for who wants to hear, who don't want to hear, July, August, September, October, November, December. When government realized there was no more funds available to pay anyone in January, that government gave in. Please, for the record, that's how it was. So don't get the impression that government sat down and say, no, it's okay. Government fought. I'm a bit disappointed, though, Madam Chair, with the organizations and so on we have on this island where we couldn't come up with money from internally. But again, we know what happened when our minister tried to float the bonds. So, Madam Chair, everything has a history. Madam Chair, for those of us who might have forgotten, October, if I can recall our last budget meeting, is when government has to come with 12.7 million to pay loans prior to COVID-19. Yes, next month. 12.7 million, October, if I'm correct, Madam Chair. And this is why when I talk about debt cancellation, Madam Chair, that's from Ghana, because with 12.7 million guilders, if that debt is cancelled, civil servants, everybody can get their funds. Can't they? So besides government, Madam Chair, I'm really looking for support from members of the opposition and others to say, well, hey, Holland, what's going on? Is it going to be a loan, be written, or is it going to be cancelled? May 18, 2022, The Hague, State Secretary for Canadian Relations, Alexander van Huffelen, must provide Curaçao, Aruba, and St. Martin with more clarity about repaying, refinancing, or cancelling the approximately 2 billion guilders in loans that the Netherlands has provided due to the coronavirus crisis. The Dutch court audit makes this recommendation as part of its annual accountability audit. The term of interest-free and interest-only loans was extended in April until end of 2023. By that time, arrangements will have to be renegotiated with the Netherlands about a possible extension and any condition. We must recommend the Minister, or we recommend the Minister of Interior and Kingdom Relations to create clear expectation about repayment, refinancing, or cancellation of the loans account to the Court of Audit. Madam Chair, that's why I think our focus should be. Not on telling the government you have to meet the legal requirements for this, for 1.5%, 6%, or whatever. We want to get rid of 12.5% and the debt, Madam Chair. That's where I think the focus should be. Because as long as we are in that situation, Madam Chair, we have to find creative manners in order to deal with this matter. And as was said by the Prime Minister, Madam Chair, or the Minister of General Affairs, we are still in compliance with the conditions for the 12.5%. So let us put our brains together and see how we can find a way completely out of this, Madam Chair. We cannot continue in this manner. Madam Chair, colleague of mine got their hands on some very important documents, and I would like to know through the Chair, Madam, whether that was done through the proper channels, or how did that happen? Because there's, I won't call names again, but we know of someone who was in prison, or who lost their job, as a matter of fact, because of documents being leaked, Madam Chair. So, Madam Chair, the process, because advices and so on, ministers meeting and so on, Madam Chair, you see, and that's the issue we have, that procedures are not followed. And unfortunately, personal agendas and interests play a role, Madam Chair. So one has to be very careful, because if one has access to it, then it means all of us should have access to the document, Madam Chair. So, Madam Chair, again, I want to say this. As we go forward, always keep in mind that the people are bigger than we are. And don't say it in words, but act differently, because I'm hearing a lot of talk, but actions are different, Madam Chair. And that is the problem, because they got at different items, but the key things, Madam Chair, is not being addressed. Short-term contract, debt cancellation, minimum wage, casino fees, casino gaming board, lottery fees. Those things, Madam Chair, those things I find are of extreme importance when it comes to the people of St. Martin. So, Madam Chair, as we go forward, let us see exactly where we are saying to ourselves, is it about St. Martin, or is it about me? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Patterflat. Next on the speakers list, we have MP Christophe Emmanuel. You have the floor.
10 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good afternoon again to everyone. I just have a few questions, Madam Chair, for the Honorable Prime Minister. And Madam Chair, the question is not how the documents got here now. The question is why the government didn't send them in its entirety. That's the question. Not how they got here. So if you want to know how come you didn't get them, ask your government. How come you didn't get them? I mean, after all, if they're going to do investigations like what was going on in Vrummy to find out how these documents got here, they have to go to the very top to find out how the documents got here. Madam Chair, we can argue with the Ombudsman report over and over, but it's very difficult to argue with this one. Madam Chair, my first question to the Honorable Prime Minister. The Prime Minister made mention that this law is going to legalize what was paid out. That's what she said. Legalize what was paid out. So, Madam Chair, lady, through you, is the Honorable Prime Minister saying that what was paid out illegally? And if yes, then what law was broken? What law was broken? Those are the words of the Honorable Prime Minister. This is to legalize what was paid out. So, Madam Chair Lady, I take it that the Prime Minister is saying that what was paid out illegally. And if it was paid out illegally, Madam Chair, then some law was broken. Which law was broken, Madam Chair Lady? Madam Chair Lady, and if a law was broken, can the Honorable Prime Minister give an example as to why the law was broken and the advices that led up to breaking the law? And I would also like to know, Madam Chair Lady, yes, I would also like to know, Madam Chair Lady, can the subsidized school boards do the same thing? Can they follow the example of the government? Simply based on the words of the Prime Minister, this law is to legalize what was paid out. And I would like to ask the Honorable Prime Minister, why do you think the subsidized schools are not making the payments? Why? Why do you think the subsidized schools are not making the payments? You see, Madam Chair, when the Prime Minister was here last, it was made mention by a member of Parliament that when you don't vote for this law, you are saying to the civil servants that you don't care about them getting their pay. The pay is already done, like what my colleague made mention. But what is happening here, Madam Chair, and what this member of Parliament don't understand, how is it that the government intend to take back the money if this law is not passed? How? How are you going to do it? Because like my colleague make mention that it's coming over as if you better pass this. Because if you don't pass it, then the money that was paid out is going to be in jeopardy and we're going to have to find a way to pay it back. Madam Chair Lady, what the government is asking, what that member of Parliament is suggesting to the civil servants and the people of St. Martin, you must love your abuser, Madam Chair Lady. It's the government that abused you for the 6 months, not the gun that was put to your head. This is not a special victims unit. The government abused you for 6 months because a gun was put to their head. Really? No, Madam Chair, you call that Stockholm Syndrome. So all of a sudden now, the members of Parliament must rush and pass this law because it makes it okay, but we just abuse you for a little while. And every time a gun is put to our head, we're going to abuse you just a little more. Because a gun is against our head. Our backs are against our backs are against the wall. It's the government of St. Martin that abused you. Not the Dutch government. Not the Dutch government. If the government couldn't find a way to make the payments, it's on the government of St. Martin, not the Dutch government. But that's the excuse. Our backs were against the wall. And then what do members of Parliament say? It's only now that the IMF tell the Dutch government that, look what's happening. So you have to wait until the IMF to say something for the government of St. Martin to realize that what they have been doing to the people of St. Martin is abuse. Is abuse. So it's only when international organizations speak out and say, listen, what is going on in these islands is wrong. It's only then the government could find a voice and say, yes, it's wrong. It's wrong. Oh, and only probably because pressure is coming down on the Dutch government with all these organizations. Nonsense. It's nonsense. The government realized that they are losing ground with civil servants, with teachers, with everything that's happening in this country. So you know what? Let's break the law, rush, and pay out something. And pay out something. And now, what must we do? Get the civil servants, get the teachers, get police officers to love the government. Love your abuser. Love your abuser. Because the gun ain't against your head no more. You're backing against the wall. But it is the government that abused you. Oh my goodness, don't even talk about the justice pageant. Don't even talk about that. Don't even talk about that, Madam Chair Lady. But you see, it has to be said how it is, because you make it sound as if that civil servants are going to be penalized. They're going to be penalized if we don't pass this. I am not passing it, because you broke the law. You government did it. You government broke the law. Because you know there is a law. You came into parliament and you passed the 3 laws right in here. You passed them right in here. And now you said, Prime Minister, the payout, this law, is to legalize what was paid out. So if you said it's to legalize it, that means it was paid out illegally. Your words, Madam Chair Lady. I am saying to the people of St. Martin, no, never, never, ever, never, ever love your abuser. Abuse is abuse. Abuse is abuse. It's called Stockholm Syndrome, where the captive and the abuser, all of a sudden now, just find a way to say, man, you know, my abuser is a nice person. Because you get a little vacation, because they still owe you more. They still owe you more. They still owe you more. You know what? You want to love your abuser? Tell them walk into parliament and repeal all 3 laws. So then the subsidized schools, all the organizations, the sub-organizations, everything wouldn't have a problem today with the 12.5%. They wouldn't have not one problem. But don't march into parliament with a piece of a law to make you look good. To make you look good, Madam Chair Lady. So I just have those few questions for the Honorable Prime Minister. But I'm saying to the people, abuse is abuse. It's the government of St. Martin that abused you for 6 months. Yes, what did the Member of Parliament say? June, July, August, September, October. It's the government of St. Martin that did that to you. Abused you for 6 months. And when they come now, throw some rations at you. Rations. When they owe you much more. And the only way you can get what is due to you is when they repeal all those laws. Madam Chair Lady, I thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Emmanuel. Next on the speakers list, we have MP Rolando Bryson. You have the floor.
Madam Chair, I just had an issue with my laptop restarting. Can I ask for just 2 minutes, please?
Sure. We'll take a 2-minute adjournment. Meeting adjourned for 2 minutes. want to allow MP Bryson the opportunity to get his
And I-
laptop.
And I thank you for that, Madam
problem.
Chair.
MP Bryson, you have the floor.
Microsoft Word wanted to update at the best possible time. Madam Chair, good afternoon once again. Oh boy, you know, sometimes I does always try before meetings, you know, to kind of compare, to prepare for meetings. One of the things you do is you don't reinvent the wheel. It makes it very easy for you to prepare for a meeting. So if you handled something before, see how that was handled before, and see how we're going to handle it here. And Madam Chair, it's amazing to me to hear a member of parliament chastising the Prime Minister and how did she not follow these procedures? How could you just come to parliament just so? Madam Chair, February 25th, 2019, Minister Heerlings comes to parliament in a central committee meeting. And the article that was written, say where the Minister of Finance wanted to give a $5 million loan to the airport. Madam Chair, it says, Finance Minister Perry Heerling pleaded with the Parliament on Thursday to allow him to make the transfer to the airport ahead of presenting legislation that would formalize the change. He took this route to go to the Central Committee of Parliament for a nod of approval, which I never heard of that being a procedure, but okay, to the lengthy process of drafting the needed legislation, having it vetted, amongst others, by the Council of Advice. Madam Chair, skipping and pleading, which laws did he ignore the Accountability Ordinance? Well, Article 46 of the Accountability Ordinance, Madam Chair. Only the Minister of Finance can be authorized by national ordinance establishing the budget to enter into agreements regarding the issuance of loans for the country. That was February 25th, 2019. You need to say that was like right after the hurricane or anything. So no natural disaster, no acute need, just Parliament, please just let me give this loan. And back then, the same person sitting on that chair hit the gavel, let the minister come, and he went ahead and gave the loan. Madam Chair, the Prime Minister, I think, at least, to the very least, came with legislation, came with something in a Central Committee before the recess, soon after the decision was taken to give the payout. Madam Chair, where's the double standard? It proves to me back then there must have been some type of legal path to allow this to happen. Because how did the government, it ain't talking about small money, this is $5 million you're talking about. And all it took was a nod from Parliament? Do we have to go back and see what went wrong here, how this was possible? But you see, Madam Chair, I don't know, maybe the Prime Minister through you can clarify to me, does the Accountability Ordinance also have exceptions when it's UD ministers? Maybe there's a clause I missed that allows it to be there, and then now this government takes the path, does it better, goes via the Council of Advice, informs the Parliament within the requisite time. What is the difference now? But Madam Chair, imagine right now, we are here dealing with a situation where funds were made available to the civil servants for vacation pay. Those steps that I've described already have been followed. But you know what? Don't take my word for it. Don't take the Prime Minister or anyone here. High Council that we've talked about so much about respecting, Madam Chair, through you, did the High Council point out in any way that the Prime Minister or the government is in violation of any article of the Accountability Ordinance? Did the High Council? And what was the ultimate advice of the High Council with this law? Did they state, no, this law is not good? Sometimes, I've experienced that. If you bring a piece of legislation to the Council of Advice, if they believe this is so illegal to that extent or not sufficient enough to come to Parliament, they will issue a dicta and say they do not recommend this law come to the floor of Parliament. Was that the advice received from the Council of Advice, the High Council, that some want to pick and choose when to respect their advice or their direction? I would like to know what that is. Madam Chair, what I do note, the Council of Advice, and I do agree, they said that they did advise on cautioning the government on not to make this a habit. So, Madam Chair, is the Prime Minister's intention to do this with everything and to make this a habit? What was the response to the government from that? Did the government not agree that it is indeed important that this should only be done in absolutely exceptional cases? Is that what the government said? Or the government tried to defy this High Council? Madam Chair, you see, I can understand when politics is being played and so on, and I would even say I have to respect the member of parliament that at least you know his stance. He voting against. I could respect that. You know why? Because you know where he stands. However, when someone is trying to find each and every boy, I want to vote against this just so I could vote against, let me see if I could use accountability ordinance, that is very difficult to respect. Because where do you stand on this issue? On the one hand, you know that you are passing something that is good for the civil servants of the country. But on the other hand, you're in election mode, you're bringing back your machine, and you want to find a way to go against the government on anything they bring because the government, whatever this government brings, is no good. But don't try to justify it when the actions in the past of the party you were part of showed that it was totally okay to give a $5 million loan without even bringing legislation. Without that, just come and ask for a nod from Parliament. I could imagine, it was like, listen, Parliament, just come to the CC and just tell the MPs what it is. And Madam Chair, I sat in that meeting, and I remember some of my colleagues in opposition were very much questioning it. And I actually even brought up in that meeting, guys, if the minister at least can bring the legislation, and if he can follow the exemption clause of Article 50, just as I advised this minister, I was fair enough back then as a member of the opposition to say, Minister, I understand what you are doing. However, please explain how you are following the Article 50 exemption. When the law, another thing the accountability ordinance states is that when you want to sell shares of UTS, another attempt was coming to Parliament to just simply say, nah, man, we're going to just sell the shares. I said, no, you can't do it like that. You have to follow the law. And I didn't sit on the opposition benches and just cry. I drafted the law, and I sat on that side, and I sat with Minister Geerlings, and we found a solution, and I brought the initiative and helped the government from opposition. I understand if 90% of the times, all you're busy with is motion of no confidence and all of this. But if you identified something in this law, we are coming to the end of the second round. We have one more speaker, he might surprise me. Anybody have any amendment to say, I think this is where you could fix this law, Madam Chair? I haven't heard anything. That is the work of members of Parliament as well. And we don't see that. What we see is a reminder of the double standard of the past that can't be allowed today. So, Madam Chair, I think the Prime Minister is on the right track with the strategy of ensuring that we're creating a path to lift these civil servant cuts, that we went through an extremely difficult time, and thanks to the resilient economy and the efforts of the government to boost the economy, we are getting closer and closer to the government realizing that strategy. And I appreciate that very much, because indeed, it is unfortunate that such cuts had to be made. But the second best thing to do thereafter is to make sincere efforts to reverse it. And as the Prime Minister stated today, that is the part of the strategy. So, Madam Chair, I thank you.
Thank you, MP Bryson. We have one more member of Parliament, the last member of Parliament to speak in the second round, and that is MP Rian Peterson. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to the Honorable Prime Minister and the support staff, to my honorable colleagues, to yourself, Madam Chair, to the griffier, to the Secretariat, and to everybody else tuned in. Madam Chair, I see that emotions have taken over the day today, but unlike some of the MPs in here, I am fortunate enough to have not been part of any faction in the past in regards to the Parliament of St. Maarten. So therefore, mediocre decisions made in the past do not justify less mediocre decisions made in the past, in the present, or the future. So to that extent, Madam Chair, I am not going to belabor the issue any longer. It's a lot of difference of opinion that we've been hearing here in regards to ministers from the past and how they have done it. But by the end of the day, we are here now in 2022, and everybody has to vote their conscience. We have a law, Article 50, that's in place in the Ontwerplandsverordening. Till up to now, I have not heard where the exception, indien het een landsbelang zulks acuut vordert, of bij onverwacht opgekomen dringende behoeften in het dienstjaar waarin de begroting niet was voorzien. Those two exceptions that the law gives, I have not heard them justified here yet. een acuut landsbelang, I don't see any war or anything going on. And when it comes to een onverwacht opgekomen dringende behoefte, I don't think that the government can say that because this was not onverwacht opgekomen. So until I get a justification as to how this is an exception, and this is regardless of what Minister Perry Geerlings did in the past or whichever machine is going to come back, until I get that, then I stand by what I said in the first round. And this is not a matter of the civil servants not getting their what's due to them, because as I also said in round one, Madam Chair, and I would like to end off my round two statement, if there is any indication that the government would even attempt to try to take the money back from the civil servants, I would personally assist them legally into fighting this because I am 100% sure that they will win the case. This is not their risk, and let's not pretend that this is going to fall on them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Peterson. We have come to the end of the questions in round two. I would now like to turn the floor over to the Prime Minister, or maybe should we take an adjournment to caucus and see if you can respond to all the questions that was posed in round two? Take a 2-minute break, 3-minute break? 2-minute break? Okay, we'll take a 2-minute adjournment. Meeting adjourned for 2 minutes. Welcome back, members of parliament. We just took a brief adjournment to allow the Prime Minister some time to inform us and let us know how long she would need to answer the questions in the second round. So with that, I'd like to give you the floor, Madam Prime Minister.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Seeing the time constraints for the next meeting, we wouldn't be able to come with the answers as were requested by the Parliament. However, I wanted to provide at least a semblance of clarity that at no point did government state, write, or request that the people of St. Martin who have been granted this relief would have to pay back this money. So when people try to spin things for their political reasons, I take a serious offense to that, because from the get-go, we as government did everything possible to avoid taking these steps. Please remember, 9 million in the bank and how much it would need to pay salaries. We would not have been able to pay salaries in December, past December. So January morning, we said no to the Dutch. All of us would have been without a salary come January morning. And at that point, who would then be facing the wrath of the public? It would be this government. So those decisions were taken at a time of severe need. Those decisions were taken, also taken into consideration, we don't want to touch salaries. That is what we did, and as soon as possible, we did our best to alleviate it with this measure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be returning as soon as Parliament can reschedule to be able to answer to the members of Parliament and finalize this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your remarks. With that, members of Parliament, we would have to then adjourn this meeting until further notice. Meeting adjourned until further notice.